The video presents a compelling, albeit speculative, scenario set in April 2025, depicting a dramatic escalation in US-China trade tensions that sends shockwaves through the global economy. This hypothetical future offers a thought-provoking examination of economic vulnerabilities, strategic realignments, and potential shifts in global power dynamics that could emerge from intensified competition between the world's two largest economies. What makes this scenario particularly intriguing is not merely the immediate impact of trade restrictions, but the broader strategic maneuvers that signal a fundamental restructuring of the global economic architecture. While presented as a future projection, the narrative builds upon existing tensions, technological competition, and strategic rivalries that have already begun reshaping international economic relations in our present reality. This analysis explores the key themes presented in the video, examining the multifaceted dimensions of this hypothetical economic confrontation and its potential implications for global markets, corporations, consumers, and geopolitical alignments. Rather than predicting the future, this examination serves to highlight critical vulnerabilities and strategic considerations that merit attention in understanding the evolving US-China economic relationship. In this hypothetical timeline, April 10, 2025 emerges as a pivotal moment when Beijing imposes sweeping 125% tariffs on American goods. This decisive action is framed as a calculated response to the United States' implementation of unprecedented 245% tariffs on Chinese imports. Unlike previous trade disputes characterized by targeted, sector-specific measures, these comprehensive tariffs impact entire economic categories: electric vehicles, high-tech machinery, and semiconductor components, representing the backbone of future-oriented economic development. The scenario presents immediate and dramatic market reactions. With U.S. exports to China valued at approximately $36 billion annually as of 2024, the economic stakes are immense. Tesla, portrayed as particularly vulnerable due to its significant Chinese market exposure, allegedly halts all exports to China, instantly losing access to what had been one of its most strategic growth markets. The company's market capitalization reportedly plummets by $2 billion within just 48 hours, illustrating how quickly investor confidence can evaporate when geopolitical tensions disrupt established business models. The agricultural sector faces equally severe disruptions in this speculative future. U.S. soybean futures declined by 4.3%, reflecting market anxiety about potential export losses. The human dimension of these macroeconomic shifts becomes apparent as farmers in states like Iowa and Nebraska confront profound uncertainty about their economic futures. Local businesses in these agricultural communities begin cutting back operations, while early layoffs among agricultural workers signal the beginning of broader economic pain, extending far beyond corporate balance sheets. The scenario suggests this is not merely a temporary trade dispute, but the opening salvo in a fundamental economic decoupling, a strategic rather than tactical confrontation with long-term structural implications for global commerce. Beyond tariffs, China's financial strategy and dollar decoupling. What distinguishes this hypothetical scenario from conventional trade disputes is the comprehensive nature of China's response, particularly in the financial domain. The video portrays Beijing implementing a sophisticated strategy designed to systematically reduce its exposure to the U.S.-dominated financial architecture. A centerpiece of this approach involves China reducing its holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds to their lowest level in 15 years, reaching just $668.6 billion. This represents a significant reduction from previous levels, suggesting a deliberate policy of diversifying away from dollar-denominated assets. Rather than an impulsive reaction, This move is characterized as a carefully orchestrated exit strategy designed to shield China's economy from potential Western financial sanctions or restrictions. Complementing this financial realignment, major Chinese state banks, specifically the China Construction Bank and Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, I, reportedly cease issuing new loans denominated in US dollars. Instead, they pivot toward the yuan and euro for international financing operations. This shift in lending practices represents a critical step toward reducing dollar dependency in international financial transactions. Perhaps most symbolically significant in this narrative is a hypothetical $2.9 billion oil transaction between China and Saudi Arabia conducted entirely in digital yuan, with not a single US dollar involved in the process. Given the historical dominance of the dollar in global energy markets since the 1970s petrodollar system, this development would signal a potentially historic shift in international monetary arrangements. The scenario suggests these financial maneuvers collectively constitute what Chinese strategists describe as building an economic immune system, a comprehensive framework designed to insulate China's economy from external financial pressures or potential sanctions. Rather than merely defensive, this approach is portrayed as forward-looking, aimed at constructing alternative financial architecture capable of operating independently from Western-dominated systems. The technology front, semiconductor strategy and the Intel crisis. The technological dimension of this economic confrontation receives particular emphasis in the video, with the semiconductor industry emerging as a critical battleground. On April 12, 2025, within this hypothetical timeline, China reportedly prohibits all government agencies and major corporations from purchasing semiconductor products manufactured by American companies, including industry leaders Intel, AMD, and Micron. The consequences for Intel are portrayed as particularly devastating. The company allegedly loses $100 billion in market capitalization within 48 hours, with its stock price plummeting by 18.3%. This vulnerability stems from Intel's significant exposure to the Chinese market, which reportedly accounts for approximately 27% of the company's revenue, equivalent to $22 billion in 2024. The ripple effects extend throughout the semiconductor sector, with industry indexes SOXX and SMH experiencing declines of 4.2% and 2% respectively. Beyond the immediate financial impact, the scenario outlines a broader Chinese initiative to systematically remove US-designed chips from public infrastructure and energy systems by 2027. Analysts in this hypothetical future project that this policy could potentially eliminate $350 billion in revenue from American semiconductor companies over time, representing an existential threat to certain segments of the U.S. technology industry. The video presents Huawei achieving a significant technological breakthrough in this future timeline, successfully producing 5nm chips without utilizing extreme ultraviolet EUV lithography technology, which had previously been considered impossible without access to Western technology. This development raises profound questions about China's capacity to achieve technological self-sufficiency in other critical domains, including servers, cloud computing infrastructure, and artificial intelligence systems. This narrative thread highlights how technological interdependence, long considered a stabilizing factor in US-China relations, could potentially transform into a strategic vulnerability as both nations pursue greater self-sufficiency in critical technologies. The video portrays China implementing a comprehensive strategy to reduce external dependencies and build resilient domestic supply chains across multiple sectors. This approach encompasses everything from food security to advanced manufacturing capabilities. In the agricultural domain, Chinese soybean imports allegedly declined precipitously from 32 million tons in 2018 to just 9.4 million tons by 2024. This reduction reflects a deliberate policy of decreasing reliance on U.S. agricultural exports, which had historically constituted a significant component of bilateral trade. Simultaneously, China establishes long-term food security agreements with alternative suppliers like Argentina and Kazakhstan, while systematically increasing national grain reserves by approximately 18% annually. The technology sector witnesses equally significant transformations in this scenario. Domestic semiconductor production reportedly grows at an impressive 34% annual rate since 2021, reflecting massive investments in indigenous technological capabilities. Major Chinese technology firms, including Huawei and Xiaomi, are depicted systematically relocating production away from U.S.-linked supply chains, establishing new manufacturing facilities in countries like Mexico, Egypt, and Indonesia to circumvent potential restrictions. These developments represent what the video terms China's construction of an economic immune system, a comprehensive framework designed to withstand external pressures and potential sanctions. Rather than reactionary, this approach is portrayed as strategically deliberate, reflecting years of careful planning and systematic implementation. The narrative suggests a fundamental philosophical difference underlying these developments. While Western economic models have historically emphasized efficiency and cost minimization through globalized supply chains, this emerging Chinese approach prioritizes security and resilience, even at the cost of higher production expenses or reduced short-term economic efficiency. The video introduces another critical dimension to this economic confrontation: control over strategic maritime passages that serve as vital arteries for global trade. Approximately 5% of worldwide commerce, valued at over $500 billion annually, traverses major canal systems that dramatically reduce shipping distances between key global markets. The scenario references historical proposals for a Chinese-backed canal through Nicaragua, which would potentially serve as an alternative to the Panama Canal. While the original $50 billion project announced in 2014 by businessman Wang Jiang reportedly stalled due to financing difficulties and local opposition, the video suggests renewed development activity by 2024. This revival allegedly takes the form of infrastructure improvements, including seaports and rail lines being implemented across the proposed route, developments that, while officially described as commercial investments, align with the earlier canal proposals. The strategic implications of such developments would be profound. Approximately 72% of cargo transiting the Panama Canal is either destined for or originates from the United States. The emergence of an alternative route potentially influenced by China could fundamentally alter regional logistics patterns and power dynamics in the Western Hemisphere. This narrative thread highlights how economic competition extends beyond traditional tariffs and trade flows to encompass critical infrastructure and transportation networks. Control over key trade routes represents not merely commercial advantage but strategic leverage in the international system, a dimension of great power competition that echoes historical patterns of geopolitical rivalry. The hypothetical scenario outlines widespread economic repercussions extending far beyond the bilateral U.S.-China relationship. Financial markets react swiftly to the escalating tensions, with the S&P 500 reportedly declining by 3.5% and the Dow Jones experiencing significant losses as investors reassess global economic prospects. According to a Goldman Sachs analysis presented in this future scenario, the probability of a U.S. recession increases to 45%, driven primarily by export declines, market volatility, and disrupted supply chains. The agricultural sector faces particular challenges, with American farmers suffering from lost export opportunities and price volatility. Consumer impacts manifest across multiple dimensions. Electric vehicle prices, particularly Tesla models, reportedly increased by $5,000 to $7,000 per unit due to the combined effects of tariffs and disruptions in critical mineral supplies including lithium, nickel, and aluminum. Computer manufacturers HP and Dell announced price increases of 12% to 17% for systems utilizing Intel processors, reflecting broader supply chain disruptions that elevate prices across the electronics ecosystem. These price increases generate inflationary pressures that disproportionately impact lower and middle-income households, who allocate larger percentages of their disposable income to consumer goods. The narrative suggests a world where everyday products, from smartphones to household appliances, become more expensive and less accessible to average consumers. Beyond consumer prices, employment impacts spread throughout manufacturing sectors dependent on exports or integrated supply chains. The scenario depicts tens of thousands of jobs tied to Chinese trade facing uncertainty, particularly in technology manufacturing, agriculture, and related service industries. A central theme throughout the video is China's systematic development of alternative financial infrastructure designed to circumvent dollar dependency. The digital yuan emerges as a cornerstone of this strategy, gradually gaining traction in international transactions beyond China's borders. From just 2.2% of global payments in 2020, the Chinese yuan allegedly reaches 6.3% by 2025 in this scenario. While still considerably below the dollar's dominant position, this growth trajectory suggests an accelerating shift in the international monetary system. The development of digital currency infrastructure provides China with technological advantages in designing next-generation payment systems, less dependent on traditional banking networks. The scenario depicts this financial transformation extending beyond China, with countries including Brazil, France, and Saudi Arabia exploring alternative payment mechanisms for conducting international trade outside the US dollar framework. Rather than occurring through dramatic announcements or formal agreements, this evolution unfolds through thousands of incremental changes across the global financial architecture, commercial decisions, bilateral arrangements, and technological adoptions that collectively reshape monetary practices. This narrative thread highlights how technological innovation in payment systems intersects with geopolitical competition, creating new possibilities for reducing dollar dependency that previous challengers to U.S. monetary hegemony lacked. The digital dimension of currency competition introduces novel dynamics that could potentially accelerate shifts in global financial practices. The video portrays significant industrial realignment occurring in response to these geopolitical tensions. Major corporations face strategic dilemmas as established business models predicated on integrated global markets become increasingly untenable. European corporations make pivotal decisions in this hypothetical future. BASF, a European chemical conglomerate, reportedly announces a $7.2 billion expansion in China, despite explicit warnings from Washington against such investments. This suggests fracturing Western unity and demonstrates China's continued attractiveness as both a market and production hub despite rising geopolitical tensions. Simultaneously, American manufacturers begin diversifying away from Chinese market dependency. Tesla and other major exporters explore alternative markets in Southeast Asia, Europe, and Latin America. Some domestic manufacturers potentially benefit from reduced Chinese competition in the U.S. market, experiencing opportunities for market share growth and production expansion. The semiconductor industry undergoes particularly dramatic restructuring in this scenario. Beyond the immediate impact on Intel and other U.S. chip manufacturers, the entire global semiconductor ecosystem faces realignment. Companies must choose between maintaining access to the Chinese market or preserving their relationships with U.S. technology ecosystems and regulatory frameworks. This industrial reorganization generates significant transition costs as corporations invest in redundant facilities, reorient supply chains, and navigate increasingly complex regulatory environments. The narrative suggests a world where global business strategies must increasingly account for geopolitical risk factors alongside traditional commercial considerations. The mineral security challenge, critical resources and supply vulnerabilities. Beyond semiconductor technology, the scenario highlights critical mineral resources as another key vulnerability in global supply chains. China reportedly halts exports of essential materials including nickel, lithium, and aluminum, resources crucial for manufacturing electric vehicles, advanced batteries, and various high-technology products. This disruption exposes significant vulnerabilities in Western supply chains, particularly for industries undergoing energy transitions toward electrification. Electric vehicle manufacturers face component shortages and price increases, with Tesla vehicles allegedly experiencing price hikes between $5,000 and $7,000 per unit. The narrative suggests these supply challenges catalyze policy responses in Western nations. Discussions reportedly begin within the U.S. government regarding potential relaxation of certain environmental regulations to facilitate domestic processing of critical minerals. Countries including Australia, Canada, and Brazil accelerate development of alternative supply sources, though establishing new extraction and processing capacity requires significant time and investment. This aspect of the scenario highlights how economic security concerns increasingly intersect with environmental policies and resource governance. Nations face complex trade-offs between environmental protection, economic development, and supply chain resilience, challenges that resist simple solutions and require sophisticated policy frameworks balancing multiple competing priorities. The hypothetical scenario extends beyond bilateral U.S.-China dynamics to encompass broader geopolitical realignments. According to IMF projections presented in this future scenario, by April 2025, China's share of global GDP measured by purchasing power parity, PPP, reaches 33.6%, surpassing the G7 nations' collective share of 29.9%. A symbolic economic milestone signifying shifting global economic gravity. The video suggests this economic reality influences diplomatic and strategic calculations worldwide. Nations increasingly hedge their positions, maintaining cooperative relationships with both the United States and China while avoiding exclusive alignment with either power. This strategic ambiguity becomes particularly evident among European nations, traditional U.S. allies who nevertheless maintain significant economic ties with China. Countries in Southeast Asia, Africa, and Latin America face particularly complex calculations in this hypothetical future. The scenario depicts growing Chinese investment and economic partnerships across these regions, offering development benefits while potentially carrying implicit political conditions or expectations. Nations must navigate these relationships while maintaining sovereignty and decision-making autonomy. This narrative thread highlights how economic considerations increasingly shape diplomatic alignments in the international system. Traditional alliance structures, predicated primarily on security considerations, face growing pressure from economic interdependencies and development imperatives that may suggest alternative partnership arrangements. The video concludes by questioning whether these hypothetical developments collectively signal the emergence of a new global economic order. One, where the U.S. dollar's primacy faces unprecedented challenges and integrated global markets fragment into competing spheres of influence. The scenario presents a world where major economies are quietly preparing for a post-dollar-centric international system while navigating the complex transition process. For the United States, this speculative future presents both significant challenges and potential opportunities. The disruption of established trade patterns creates openings for domestic manufacturing revitalization and supply chain diversification. The narrative suggests three fundamental shifts potentially taking shape: reshoring and reinvigoration of domestic industry, diversified trade partnerships beyond China, and financial reinforcement through dollar dominance preservation efforts. For China, the scenario depicts both vulnerabilities and strengths. While economic growth would likely slow during any decoupling process, the development of more self-reliant industrial capacity and alternative financial arrangements could potentially enhance long-term resilience against external pressures. The transition costs would be substantial but potentially yield strategic benefits over extended timeframes. For the global economic system, this hypothetical future suggests increasing complexity and regionalization rather than straightforward bifurcation. Rather than a simple US-China binary choice, nations would likely construct nuanced approaches incorporating elements from multiple economic models and maintaining diverse international partnerships calibrated to their specific development needs and strategic circumstances. The video frames this moment of economic turbulence as potentially transformative, a rare opportunity for fundamental reassessment of economic arrangements that have governed international commerce for decades. While acknowledging the significant disruption such changes would entail, the narrative suggests these challenges might ultimately produce more resilient and diversified global economic structures better suited to a multipolar world. It's important to emphasize that this scenario represents a speculative exploration rather than a prediction. The timeline, numerical projections, and specific events should be understood as elements of a hypothetical narrative designed to explore potential vulnerabilities and strategic considerations in US-China economic relations. The actual evolution of trade tensions and technological competition will likely follow a more nuanced and gradual trajectory shaped by diplomatic efforts, domestic political considerations, and the complex economic interdependencies that have developed over decades. Multiple factors including leadership changes, technological developments, and shifting domestic priorities could significantly alter the course of US-China relations from the path outlined in this speculative scenario. Nevertheless, this thought experiment highlights important structural tensions and strategic challenges that will continue to influence international economic relations in the coming years. Understanding these dynamics remains crucial for businesses, policymakers, and citizens navigating an increasingly complex global economic environment characterized by both persistent interdependence and growing strategic competition.